Emerging trends in data analytics are mostly around, as far as I'm concerned and my array of research is concerned, is about data science and machine learning, mostly. And most of what we are seeing there is the capability for these techniques, for example, not just to detect trends and patterns and be able to be more efficient in your business, but it's also an explainability factor. So if you deny a loan to someone, you have to say why. And some of those techniques are very good at detecting why, some of that can happen, but not good at explaining it. So you need to be able to get those explanations. The second trend that I see mostly now in data science and machine learning is about being able to look at all the data you have, unstructured, structured data, semi-structured data, be able to make a determination around that, but then the problem is that those organizations have a hard time to operationalize, to put them in production. So they are great at developing models, but not very good at productizing them. And that's where the money is. That's where the rubber meets the road, when you're able to productize those models and make them to work for the organization. Well, the more sources you have, the more bound you are to have not data that is as great shaped as you would expect. And to your point, which is very true, you need ship-shaped data to do analytics. I mean, to do, I would say, machine learning, predictive analytics. If you do business intelligence, the quality of the data can be okay, and actually you can maybe deal with that. But if you do data science, you can't afford to have bad data. So why is it that it's not that good data? Well, very often it's captured by organizations or systems that are not even so keen on providing some control mechanism on how they gather that data, for example. So then you end up with data that's actually not always in the shape that you wanted to do the analytics. So for example, you have missing values, you have values that are shifted, that are different, and sometimes the quality of the data is not captured well, it's just that the measures with which you capture them has to be normalized. So for example, if you are a company in Canada, an insurance company or a banking company in Canada, you have kilometers and miles, and you want to measure the distance of your customers to the different branches, for example, you cannot use both, you have to use one or the other. That's called normalization. So sometimes the quality of data comes from the preparation of that data, not just necessarily the way it was captured. So we have more and more systems in place today to validate that. The other one is we get so much data right now that we can actually cross-reference that data to enhance its quality. So you have different origins of the data, so you can then make sure that what you are capturing is actually something you can be using inside data science techniques. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. It's where you can cut costs and do operational work. It's where you can grow revenue or retain customers. It's where you can actually detect fraud and capture risk. It's absolutely everywhere. Lately, I've seen a lot more cases on customer analytics. That has been one of the things where banks are not truly customer-centric. The problem has been that they're having had their lunch eaten by the Fintechs. They are starting to waking up to the fact that maybe they took their customer for granted for too long. And so that's where we are seeing the most innovation today. So for fake data and for fake news or whatever you want to call it, I'm on the data science and artificial intelligence side of the house, right? I'm not on the data warehousing side of the house. So for me, fake news is all a matter of perspective. What may be fake to you may not be fake for someone else. So the problem is that there's a lot of subtleties on how you can detect some of that as well. It depends on which perspective you are standing as well. So AI techniques are very good usually at being able to detect also nuances that can actually bring you to whether that piece of news, that piece of information could be trusted or non-trusted. It also depends on your purpose on using that piece of information. We use also triangulation techniques. So by the flow of data that we get, we're able to say, well, that data has been relevant for that purpose or that purpose or that purpose. And if we have an external source, we can cross-validate with that, and we can start understanding whether or not the data we want to use can be trusted. I don't like to use the word fake because, again, it doesn't mean much for many people. So can you trust it or not is the way that I can position it. For the security aspect, I've been working a lot with companies lately on authentication of users, authentication of customers. How do you authenticate someone? How do you know that a potential use is fraudulent or not? It could be simple cases. One of the big problems for banks around security very often on detecting authentication is false positive. The last thing you want is a customer being stuck at a store somewhere, not being able to use their credit card, for example, because you have a false positive somewhere. They are perfectly good customers. So how do you do that? External data can use. For example, if I have my cell phone and I can cross-reference my cell phone data, my GPS location with my credit card location, I know that it's potentially not a false positive. Right? So being able actually to cross-reference that data together is absolutely critical to be able then to understand whether or not the data that you get can be trusted again or not, depending on what you have in terms of an input. Simple case, but a good way to be able to do that. I worked on cases for authentication of users from pattern detection as well. How do you detect a pattern of potential fraud, and how do you catch someone to be able to do that? So that's AI techniques, for example, are fairly good at this kind of problematics. For me, the challenges in the financial sector is about user centricity. And I do not mean being customer centric. The banks are talking about it today because, let's face it, they are not customer centric. When you call actually just the 800 line to be able to help because you have a problem with your credit card, you understand what I mean by not being very customer centric. The reality is that most of the business that has been lost recently has been because of that. So I think the big change in the bank going forward is going to be truly customer-centric. Let me give you an example. The bank I'm actually banking at in the United States has been asking me some of those questions as a client. And I was telling them, well, look, 100 meters around my house, 100 meters around my work, you don't have an ATM. So I have to use one of your competitors' ATM to draw cash. And you're charging me $4, $3 per time that I have to withdraw that cash. It's your fault not having an ATM around my house, around my work. So why don't you take advantage and pay those charges for me? That's being customer-centric, but that's not the way the banks are thinking today. So I think, how do you make sure you can use those kind of measures, do the analytics around it, understand the stickiness of your customers, their life cycle as well, on top of those kind of actions. And then you can talk to me about being customer-centric. So I think the future for the next 2 or 3 years is going to depend on how banks treat their customers in a real customer centricity manner. And I think that's where all these techniques are going to start to play around. Hyper-contextualization, being able to make sure that you have good recommendations for the customer, being relevant for the product you offer them, and following their life cycle. That's what I think is again the future for them. I think there is one thing that people are not considering in all these industries, and one of the advice I give some of the banks that I'm talking to and insurance companies as well is leave your customer alone. Stop bugging them with recommendations that make no sense to them at all. So the best way to help them is to stop talking to them. And I know it's counterintuitive, but being more relevant to them really gonna help them to be able to sort of respond to you. Build trust by being relevant, trustworthy, and transparent. And I think if you adapt all of those techniques, then you have a chance to be able to survive as a company.